Hi, my name is Pete Anziano. I'm an adventure-seeking husband, father, and will also be your guide on this series. I became a part of the community of people living with paralysis nearly 20 years ago. This transition marked a significant shift in my life, compelling me how to learn how to advocate for access to the things that brought me joy and joy to my life as a family man. If you're watching this, it's likely because either you or someone you know is living with a disability. Welcome. Throughout these videos, you'll hear from real people across the country who are a part of the disability community. Our hope is not only to equip you with the skills to advocate for yourself, but also to reassure you that you're not alone.
Advocacy, I believe, really starts with self-knowledge, knowing thyself, knowing what your worth is, and bringing yourself up to the point where you should not be devalued or abused. We all deserve to be cared and respected and live with dignity.
In this first video, we'll cover two topics. First, we'll delve into a brief history of our community. It's important to know how far we've come so that we can understand what else needs to be done. Secondly, we'll take a quick glance at our current situation. The subsequent videos in this series will help you develop the skills in being a self-advocate and guide you through your rights in specific areas. Before we get started, let me briefly define what it means to be a self-advocate. Self-advocacy is the ability to speak up for yourself and assert your needs, rights, and desires. Self-advocacy can be a daunting task, but it is an essential skill for individuals with disabilities to navigate and succeed in a world that's not necessarily designed with our needs in mind.
I got arrested in Ohio for a protest we were doing, and I had been going to demonstrations and being a somewhat leader of local groups and things like that with ADAPT. We were staying in Columbus, Ohio, like 3 blocks away from their state Medicaid headquarters. So we marched from the hotel to the Medicaid building, and then we blocked the doors.
As a person with a disability, you are a part of a unique community that has a rich history guided by and rooted in the work of self-advocates striving to change their circumstances to create a more accessible world. The disability rights movement began gaining traction in the 1960s and was inspired by the civil rights and the feminist movements of the time. It was a social movement that worked to secure equal opportunities and rights for our community. One of the critical events in the early history of the movement was the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. This legislation had a significant impact on the disability rights movement as it provided the basis for further efforts to secure equal rights for people with disabilities.
I was having dinner with a friend of mine, and he goes, "Hey, that's Ed Roberts over there." Well, Ed Roberts was the founder, or one of the founders, of the early disability rights movement in California. He was a person with post-polio, so essentially he was paralyzed from the neck down. And for a while, he lived with an iron lung. And then eventually they got a portable ventilator and attached that to his wheelchair. And he was able to find his way into University of Berkeley. And then he wanted to live on campus. And he negotiated with the school. And they created sort of a dormitory for quote-unquote disabled students. So at nighttime, they would have these gab sessions from their iron lung, and they would talk until 4 in the morning about how they were going to take over the world.
Self-advocate leaders of the time emphasized that a person is not broken or disabled because of a diagnosis. They emphasized the social model of disability. Someone is disabled by an inaccessible environment and the attitudes of others, not their body.
I was learning how many barriers there were. My mom and I used to go to the mall and pass out handwritten notes on windows of cars there weren't many parking places. We used to park across two places and make an accessible one. Weren't any building codes really. Curb cuts, what are those? Bathroom stalls, what are those? Mirrors you could see in. So I was learning, this, what the heck's going on there?
In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was passed, prohibiting disability-based discrimination in programs receiving federal funds. Yet, a contentious point remained. Section 504, which drew language from the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Disability rights advocate Judy Heumann, leader of the Disabled in Action, championed the cause, leading a 25-day sit-in, the longest occupation of a federal building to date. Several sit-ins were organized nationwide, with the San Francisco one standing out due to its size and broad support from the local communities, the Black Panther Party, and disability rights groups.
And I think what figures like Ed Roberts and Judy Heumann provide to people is an example of you don't have to accept second-class status, that people have agency, that they can make a difference and make choices, and that they should not just accept less than a fair and equal status with the rest of society.
Although the Rehabilitation Act was enacted in 1973, the regulations of Section 504 took an additional 4 years to be signed, but the work was still not done.
So our first campaign in 78 was the parking. And we began to look at the Architectural Barriers Act of 68 had passed. And it said if you get federal money, your building has to be accessible. It wasn't private sector. It was, city, state, federal building, and they had to have parking places.
So I got involved in a class action versus the University of Texas. And it was based on Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act that said if you receive federal funding, you cannot discriminate. You must have accessibility, and that was the law. Well, their transit wasn't accessible, so we were fighting accessible transportation all over the nation. And it started there as a case study, I guess, of, this is wrong, and you need to fix it.
Even with Section 504 enacted in 1977, the need for major changes remained clear throughout the next decade. The frustration grew into a collective action. 1,000+ protesters, most with disabilities, arrived and conducted sit-ins in the Capitol, followed by the Capitol Crawl, where more than 60 people got out of their chairs and discarded their mobility devices to crawl up the 83 stairs that led to the Capitol. Protesters chanted, "What do we want? ADA! When do we want it? Now!" This ultimately led to the passage of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, in 1990, illustrating just how crucial it is to speak up in the face of injustice. The ADA explained protections against disability discrimination, improving opportunities and lives for everyone. Let's take a quick look at what the ADA covers. Title I of the ADA covers employment, and it prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in the workplace. Title II of the ADA applies to state and local governments. It requires them to ensure that people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from their programs and services. This includes things like building accessibility, transportation, and communication with people who have disabilities. Title III of the ADA applies to private businesses, nonprofit organizations, and other entities that are open to the public. It requires these entities to provide people with disabilities an equal opportunity to access their goods, services, and facilities. This means ensuring that buildings, spaces, and other places are accessible to people with disabilities, including providing things like ramps, elevators, and accessible parking spaces. Additionally, Title IV of the ADA addresses the communication aspect of the Act. It requires that telecommunications companies must make their services accessible to people with disabilities. Self and community advocates have been the driving force behind disability rights and the laws that have resulted from their collective action. But you might be asking yourself, how can I become an effective self-advocate? Well, stick around. In the next video, we'll take a brief look at what it means to be an effective self-advocate. For more information, be sure to download the resources for this video series.